Hello and thank you for coming to check this out. So here is our most recent After Effects logo reproduction using Apple Motion 5. And for this guide we are going to look at two very similar animations. First of all, we'll look at how this one was put together. This is from afeeFX and it's from the product page over at the Envato Market. There's a link in the description to go and check that out. So I chose this one to work out how to get a logo cut out across these elements. And while I was working on this, over at the Sonduck Film channel, Josh Noel posted a great After Effects tutorial that does a very similar animation, but Josh has added this awesome tagline to it to make it more exciting. So we'll have a look at how this one was put together, and then we'll move on and see how to make this tagline animation using motion tools. And along the way we're going to check out a couple of simple steps you can do with motion to get these shines running across your elements. So this one here, if you can see it running across, and a more shiny and vibrant one for Josh Noel's version. So the project file is there for you to download. You'll need to be using Motion 5.4.1 to open up that project file. But for this guide, the elements are nice and simple, so I'll be going through everything step by step. You should be able to follow along by making a fresh project. The project file I'll be using is 1920 by 1080, and it will be at 30 frames a second. You need about 5 seconds duration. 5 or 7. Okay then, let's jump into it and get started. So here we are in the first of the project files that's there for you to download. This is the version from afeeFX, and there's a link in the description if you want to check out that original graphic over at their product page at the Envato Market. So the first group here is just the tagline. So that just has this animated bar and the Apple Motion 5 text. And these two groups each have an identical animation for the slats with the cutout logo, but I've just used a different method for each one. And we'll go through each of them. So let's start with the image mask method. I'll start a new group so that we can do it step by step. Right, so I will begin by grabbing the line tool and just draw a line up there. In geometry, I'm going to make sure that this is minus 150 and this one here is 150. Then in the style section, turn off these caps, set the width to 75, and we'll add the red color. So I'll just drag that over here, and now I'm going to replicate that, or you can just use L on your keyboard. We want the replicator to be a line with 4 points. And if you can't see the handles to control the replicator, you can right click on it and choose from this menu, or down here choose adjust item. Let's just pull them out a bit. Okay, so we have our replicator done. Now we want to animate that, and to do that we will use sequence replicator. So I'll grab that from this menu, and we want this to be trimmed out here at 1 second 5 frames. So hit O on my keyboard to trim it out there in the timeline. In the replicator settings, we want to set sequencing to from, and spread to 8, and then we're going to add position parameters open it up, just bring your playhead back to the start and move the Y parameter to push the replicator off the screen. And playing back, we have that animation. Right, let's add the logo. I'll just come down here and grab a copy. And drag it over. And delete the image mask that was on it. And delete the fill as well. So this is the colorful Motion 5 logo. I just got it from the internet, and I'm going to turn it white again by using the stylize fill filter. And now I will add that image mask back on and use this replicator as the source. And then the next step is to take that source replicator, duplicate it, and turn it on. So that is the first way to get this animation. The other method is to use preserve opacity, and I'm just going to jump out and open a new project to show you how that's done. Right, so we have just the logo and one replicator set up ready to go. So to have the logo be revealed just by the slats and cut out in the negative space between them, I'm just going to grab the logo and come to properties and see this one here, preserve opacity. I'm going to turn that on. And that directly gives us the effect that we want without needing a second replicator and an image mask to bring it all together. But there's a few other things to know. If we're using preserve opacity on one item, if I bring in a background, so I have a color solid here, I'm going to turn that on, you'll see that it gets rid of the effect of the preserve opacity. So to get around that, we're going to move the background to its own group and set that group under the other element. So you'll see the preserve opacity still isn't kicking in. So we want to grab the group here, and we are going to add an image mask to that group, and then we have restored the preserve opacity feature. I know what will happen when I do those steps, but I have to be honest and say, under the hood with Motion, I don't know why. I put a link in the description for you to check out the Apple user guide pages if you want to dig deeper into preserve opacity. As Apple explains it. And a while ago I did a guide about various ways to use preserve opacity in your projects, and there's a link to that as well if you want to check it out. So that's the two methods that I know to get this animation. So let's go and have a look at the tagline for this version. Right, we're back in the project file. So we're looking at how to animate the tagline. So I'll grab our demo group here, and I'll grab the line tool, and holding shift I'll draw a line in there. I'll make it white, and I'm just going to set the width to 10 to make it easier for you to see, and turn off the caps. I'll bring my playhead to 22 frames and trim that line to start there. And here in the style section, I'll set a keyframe for first point offset and last point offset, and drop them both to 50%. Then I'm going to bring the playhead forward to 1 second and 20 frames and bring them both, bring the first point offset back down to 0 and the last point offset up to 100%. So that's basically how to get the line to draw on from a midpoint, and then I can grab the curves, set them to Bezier, and wherever it's available, break the tangent on the handles. Okay, so I'll grab these handles and holding shift, pull them this way, and again this way. So for the text, I'll grab the text tool, not 3D text, just normal text, yep. And the font I'm using, by the way, is this one here, Triumph. I matched it using What the Font to the source graphic. There's a link in the description if you want to grab a copy of that. So we have our text here. I'll just center it, move it over, and drop the font size to 30. Let's go for 35. So at around 1 second and 4 frames, I want the font to be up above the line. And I'll set a keyframe on the Y position there, and around about 2 seconds we're going to bring that back down, and I'm going to grab this curve and adjust it this way so it drops quickly and then slowly falls into place. You'll notice that there is some scaling happening with the reproduction group here. We'll get to that in a little bit. Right, just at this last keyframe point here, I want to lift it up a little more. Okay, so now we want to mask it in. So I'm going to grab this text and put it in its own group, and with this group I'll come and grab the rectangle mask tool and draw a rectangle mask right there and set the mask to subtract. So there's the tagline for that version. Now on the preserve opacity method, that's what you can see here. If we come to properties, just in keeping with the After Effects animation, we'll see that if I unlock it here, it's keyframe to scale up gradually. Here is the scale curve, so everything in that group is scaling up toward the camera. So we've got the elements here, we've got the tagline. Let's have a look at how we do this element that brings a shine across it. So here with the demo group, I'm going to, I could just draw it out with the Bezier tool, but what I'm going to do is grab a rectangle and draw that into the group there, and in the shape properties here, I'll set an X position shear on that, and right about here I'm going to move it over the X position there, and I'm going to select preserve opacity. and I've just added an image mask to that group. So the same step that we used in the preserve opacity method that we just looked at. So right about here I'll set a keyframe on this rectangle's X position and move it through. And we can make this curve linear. And then all we need to do is grab that rectangle and drop its opacity down. Okay, we want it to start over this way more. Okay, there we go. So that is this version of the graphic. So what we'll do now is jump into the other project file and have a look at the Sunduck film version of it. This is the other project file that's there for you to download. And as I mentioned before, this one is based off of Josh Noel's After Effects tutorial, and there's a link for you in the description to check that out. So it's a very similar animation with a few key differences. The tagline is much more interesting, and we're going to look at that step by step. The bars themselves, the slats, appear from on canvas rather than from coming down off canvas, and you'll find the replicator itself here in this group slats, and you can see there is just a rectangle mask applied to get that effect. The sheen is done differently. You can see here it's just a line on a 45-degree angle, I think, 27-degree angle, and you can see it's just a line with a width of 17. I've applied a motion path behavior to move it up and across rather than keyframing, and I've applied a Gaussian blur filter and a glint filter, and I've just played around with those settings until I got something looking like this. And you can see I've used the same preserve opacity method to trim the line into the shape, and the line itself, there's the preserve opacity check. The line itself is set to just around 25 for opacity. Okay, so let's have a look at how to do this tagline. We have got this circle scaling in and then splitting, and as it splits apart it draws out a line, and that entire element will then rise up to reveal the text. Let's turn off the animation and start a new group. Let's do the circle first. I'll grab the circle tool and draw a circle in there and center it. Alright, so now we want to scale. I'm just going to keyframe that. I'll drop the scale to 0 at the start of the timeline and set a keyframe. Then at frame 12, bring that scale back to 100. So we have our circle scaling in. So right now I'm going to duplicate that circle and call it circle left, and this one circle right. Okay, so the steps I'm taking here are just in line with Josh Noel's After Effects tutorial. I'm just going to show you the same method using motion. So with the playhead where they reach 100% scale, I'll grab circle left, come to properties, set a keyframe on the X, and here at 1 second, let's send that over to -500 on the x-axis. I'll come back to the 12th frame, grab circle right, set a keyframe, come to 1 second and push it over to 500 on the x-axis. So now we've got the circles scaling in and splitting apart. So then for the line element, I'm going to grab a line, and just by eye I'll draw from this circle to that circle, come into the properties, turn it white, give it some width, and using the same method we used to animate the tagline previously, with the playhead at 12 frames, I'll set the first point and last point offset to 50, and then set a keyframe, and at 1 second, first point offset goes back to 0 and last point offset goes back to 100%. So that's one way to get the animation, and the thing to note here is I've left all the curves flat so they are linear, but let's say I wanted to have some more style with the line animation. Something like this. What you'll notice is that it becomes out of sync with the circles, so I need to go back to the circles and adjust their X position curves as well. One way around that, which is, let's just undo everything there. So one thing you can do is just use the out-of-the-box settings with motion. So if I grab these curves here and set them all to ease both, and then do the same with circle left, and again to circle right. Now everything should be in sync again. Cool. Let's look at another way to do this now, where we can get just one curve that we can play with and everything will stay in sync. So I'll grab the line and reset the keyframes there, and grab the circles and reset their X position keyframes. And what I'm going to do now is grab a rectangle, and I'm going to just roughly draw it out to match the length of the line, and I'll change the colors so it makes the next steps more obvious, and I'll drop it under everything. Okay, so now I'm going to grab circle left, come to properties, and for the X position I'm going to add parameter behavior link, and then drag in the rectangle as the source, and we want this set to object attributes edges left. And the reason I'm using link with position rather than align to is that align to has some erratic qualities to it. It doesn't always do what you want it to do. So linking to the left edge is nice and smooth in my copy of Motion anyway. So I'll grab circle right, come to X, add a link, drag in the rectangle as the source, set object attributes edges right. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the line, set an image mask on the line, and then drag in the rectangle as the source. I'll bring my playhead to 12 frames where the circles have reached 100% scale, and grab this rectangle, come to properties, And for the X scale, I'm going to set it to 0, set a keyframe, and then come to 1 second, and bring the scale back up to 100. So now we have an identical animation, but the benefit here is that I can play around with this curve as much as I like, and everything with the circles will stay in line. So we'll take another step forward and then come back to this. So another way to do it is just to get rid of the line completely. Grab the rectangle, turn it on, change the color back to white, and for the style, for the properties here, we'll drop the Y scale down to, say, how's 5? Yep. So we don't have to mask in the line at all. We can just use this method. The reason I talk about using the mask method is that, okay, so let's go back and get that line back with the mask. Okay, so this doesn't have to be a line at all. You could use this in other projects. This could be a digital line, this could be a liquid effect, it could be a flame line, and the circles will split apart and the rectangle will mask it in. So I think you could get some cool things happening with that. So that is how we build the tagline. Let's just turn back on the reproduction, and you can see that in the tagline group, here's the text. There is an image mask applied to the text. There is the, let's see, where's the source? Source is mask tagline text. Here is the source, right here. The source has an align to behavior applied, and the source for the align to behavior is this object here, the riser, and the riser is the line. So I call the line the riser, and that's the line that's being masked out by the rectangle that we saw before. And so that's how we mask in the text. Okay, so there we go. That is another After Effects reproduction in Motion 5. And for this one, just some, well, much less elaborate than the other reproductions that we've done, but I definitely learned a few things doing this one. And thanks to Josh Noel at Sundark Film for your awesome tutorial. Okay guys, I hope that this was useful. Thanks for watching.